They called me unemployed, worthless, the disappointment of the family. But 45 days later, those same people were staring at my face on national TV while Time magazine revealed their new Person of the Year, me. And if you think that moment felt sweet, wait until you hear what happened next. I still remember that Thanksgiving like it happened 5 minutes ago. Everyone was crowded around the long wooden dining table, the one my grandmother always said was strong enough to hold a whole lifetime of memories. Funny thing was, most of those memories never felt warm to me. They felt heavy, like expectations I could never meet. I walked in with a simple smile, trying not to show the pressure I carried inside, but the second I stepped through the doorway, I could already feel their eyes on me, judging, measuring, comparing. I sat down in the one chair no one ever fought for, the seat at the end of the table that felt like a waiting room for disappointments. And right when the last plate was passed around, someone asked the question I knew was coming. So, you still unemployed, huh? I laughed it off, acting like it didn't bother me, but inside it felt like someone had flipped a switch that said you're not enough. My aunt didn't even wait for me to finish chewing before adding, at your age, your father already had 2 promotions. You need to be serious about your life. Her voice sliced through me like she genuinely believed she was helping. She wasn't. My cousin leaned back in his chair, the one who never missed a chance to brag, and smirked as he said, maybe you just need motivation. Want me to send you a few job listings? The entire table laughed. My own mother hid her face behind her napkin, embarrassed. And all I could think was, if only you knew what I'm building. If only you knew what's coming. But I didn't say a word. Because sometimes silence is the only shield you have left. So I swallowed the pain, swallowed the turkey, and swallowed the urge to defend myself. They kept talking about careers, houses, salaries, achievements, everything I didn't have. Every comment was a reminder of how they saw me, a failure sitting at their table, taking up space I hadn't earned. They didn't know about the nights I stayed up building my project, the mornings I woke up before sunrise just to learn one more thing. The hope I carried even when life felt like a brick sitting on my chest. That Thanksgiving wasn't just a dinner, it was a mirror, showing me exactly what they believed I was. After dessert, when everyone started taking photos for social media, I stepped outside to breathe. The cold air hit my face like reality waking me up. I stood there under the dim porch light, hearing the muffled laughter inside, and realized that sometimes your biggest critics live under your own roof. I thought about going back in, thought about pretending everything was fine, but instead, I left. I walked down the long driveway, hands in my pockets, fighting the sting behind my eyes. That night, instead of feeling broken, I felt something else, ignition. Like everything they said poured gasoline on a fire I had been too scared to light. I made myself a promise right there on the sidewalk. I will build something so undeniable that even my biggest doubters will have no choice but to say my name with respect. The next morning, I got back to work, not out of anger, but out of vision. Days blended into nights, nights into weeks. I barely slept, barely ate anything that wasn't instant noodles, but every line of code, every email, every idea brought me closer to something bigger than their opinions. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I didn't need validation anymore. My silence became my strategy. While they thought I was wasting my life, I was building a solution that would eventually change millions of lives. And the more they doubted me, the more I sharpened my focus. Sometimes the world doesn't clap for you, sometimes it tries to crush you, but that pressure can shape diamonds if you let it. Exactly 35 days after that Thanksgiving disaster, I received an email that made my heart stop. We would like to feature your work in our upcoming global issue. I reread it at least 20 times, thinking it had to be spam, some kind of mistake, anything but real. Then I saw the signature, Senior Editor, Time magazine. My vision blurred. I felt my hands shake. All those nights alone, all those moments when I almost gave up, suddenly collapsed into this one unreal moment. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there with my laptop in my lap, letting the word finally echo through my entire body. The interview happened over Zoom because they wanted to move fast. They told me my project had reached the right people at the right moment. They said it wasn't just impressive, it was necessary. They called it innovative, impactful, bold. Words my family had never used for me. When they asked how it felt to go from overlooked to unstoppable, I thought about that Thanksgiving table, the smirks, the jokes, the looks, the silence. I didn't mention them, but inside, I whispered, if only you knew. 10 days later, they invited me to New York for the photo shoot. I wore the same black jacket my aunt once called cheap. The photographer said the shot was perfect because it made me look like someone who had been underestimated for far too long. And he was right. Everything about that day felt like a silent victory. And then came the moment, the one that flipped my entire world like a movie twist no one could have predicted. Time magazine went live with their announcement, Person of the Year. My name. My face. My work. Everywhere. Notifications exploded. My phone didn't stop buzzing for hours. But the message that hit different wasn't from strangers, it was from my mother. We saw the news. Everyone is shocked. Come home, they all want to see you. But I didn't reply. Not yet. Because I needed a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of what I had just lived through. I needed to remember the person I was before the world learned my name, the person they called unemployed, the person they overlooked, the person they dismissed. And I realized something powerful. It wasn't success that changed me. It was surviving the moments when nobody believed I ever would. When I finally walked back into that house weeks later, the energy felt different in a way that's hard to describe. The same wooden door I had walked out of with a heavy heart now seemed smaller, almost fragile, as if it could barely handle the weight of the moment. My mother opened it before I even knocked, like she had been standing on the other side waiting for the exact sound of my footsteps. Her eyes were glossy, not with disappointment this time, but with a pride so thick it softened every sharp memory I had of that night. She didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug that lasted long enough for me to feel both the apology and the love she couldn't put into words. When I stepped inside, the entire family looked up, and for the first time, they didn't look through me, they actually saw me. The room that once felt like a courtroom suddenly felt like a stage, except this time, they weren't the judges. They were the audience. My aunt, the one who used to compare me to everyone else like it was her full-time job, stood up slowly with a smile that tried too hard to look natural. We always knew you would do something big, she said. That sentence hit me in a way she probably didn't expect. It felt like she was rewriting history with a single breath, pretending the years of criticism had been secret encouragement. I just nodded, not because I believed her, but because I didn't want to turn this moment into another battlefield. My cousin, the one who teased me about being unemployed, walked over and gave me a pat on the back that felt rehearsed. He looked nervous, like he didn't know how to talk to someone who now carried global recognition. He asked if he could take a picture with me, the same cousin who once laughed when I said I had goals bigger than a paycheck. Everyone gathered around the dining table again, but this time, no one made jokes at my expense. Instead, they asked questions about my journey, about how it felt to be recognized, about what I planned to do next. For a moment, I almost felt the warmth I'd always wanted from them. But underneath the congratulations, I could still sense something else, regret, guilt, maybe even fear. The kind of fear people feel when they realize they misjudged someone who ended up proving them wrong. I answered their questions calmly, not to impress them, but because I wasn't that insecure person sitting silently at the end of the table anymore. I had earned a place in my own life, with or without their approval. Halfway through dinner, my uncle raised his glass and said, "We are proud of you." Those words, simple as they were, changed something in the air. It wasn't the words themselves, but the way he said them, slowly, carefully, like he was trying not to choke on them. For years, he had been the one who measured success by money, titles, and trophies. Hearing him acknowledge me felt surreal, but it didn't heal everything the way he might have hoped. Some wounds don't close just because someone finally decides to stop hurting you. Still, I nodded politely and thanked him. Sometimes grace is the sharpest way to show strength. After dinner, my mother pulled me aside into the kitchen where it was quiet enough to hear the hum of the old refrigerator. She placed her hands on my face, the same way she did when I was a kid, and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't defend you that night. I should have been on your side." That apology hit me harder than any insult I had ever heard. I didn't realize how much I needed those words until they slipped out of her mouth. I told her it was okay, not because it actually was, but because I knew she meant it. And sometimes, that's enough to start closing the distance between what happened and what could be healed. When I left the dining area and went outside to catch my breath, the cold November air wrapped around me just like the night I had walked out feeling defeated. Except this time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel overlooked. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything anymore. I stood there with my hands in my pockets, looking up at the same sky I had stared into weeks earlier, and I realized that life has a strange way of testing you before rewarding you. It asks you to believe in yourself long before anyone else does. It demands that you keep walking even when the road is dark, lonely, and full of voices telling you to turn back. My father's empty chair sat untouched at the table, just like every year. And for the first time, I felt like he would have been proud, not because of the fame, not because of the recognition, but because I didn't give up when the world gave up on me. I imagined him looking at me with that quiet smile he always had when he knew I was pushing through something hard. It made me breathe deeper, made me feel stronger, made me realize that sometimes the validation you need doesn't come from the people sitting right in front of you, it comes from the ones who shaped you long before the world learned your name. My phone buzzed again, another notification from someone congratulating me, but instead of checking it, I slipped it back into my pocket. Peace mattered more in that moment than popularity. I closed my eyes and let the cold air fill my lungs, not to numb anything, but to appreciate how far I had come from the night I left this house feeling like a failure. The difference between then and now wasn't the award, or the magazine cover, or the sudden admiration, it was the realization that I never needed their approval to become who I was meant to be. Their doubt didn't break me. It shaped me. And their silence didn't define me. It pushed me to create a voice loud enough for the world to hear. For the first time in my life, I walked back into that house not as the person they once pitied, but as the person I always believed I could become. And that feeling, the quiet victory that didn't need to be announced, was worth more than any spotlight. It was proof that sometimes, the most powerful success story starts with being underestimated by the people who thought they knew you best. When I finally left their house that night, I didn't feel heavy the way I used to. I felt clear, calm, steady, like someone who had been carrying a burden for years and finally set it down. The streetlights glowed softly on the pavement, and as I walked toward my car, every step felt like a quiet declaration that I was done letting other people define me. My family had changed their tone, but their praise didn't suddenly rewrite the past. What it did was remind me that the world only respects what it recognizes, not what it overlooks. And I wasn't angry about that anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I just understood. People can only see you through the window of their own experience, and sometimes that window is fogged with judgment, fear, insecurity, or expectations they never fulfilled themselves. But your vision, your calling, is something they're not supposed to understand until it's already done. The next morning, I woke up early, not out of habit but out of purpose. I sat by the window holding a warm cup of coffee, watching the sun rise in slow strokes of gold and orange. I had spent so much of my life chasing validation from people who didn't have the clarity to recognize what I carried inside me. But now, everything felt different. I no longer needed to prove anything. I no longer needed to replay old conversations in my mind or try to rewrite moments where I felt small. Growth had replaced bitterness. Confidence had replaced doubt. And peace had finally replaced the constant noise of what everyone expected me to be. I realized that true success isn't measured by applause, it's measured by the person you become when no one is clapping. Later that week, I attended a global summit where leaders, innovators, and public figures gathered to discuss projects that were shaping the future. As I stepped onto the stage, the room filled with hundreds of people, cameras flashing, voices lowering, eyes turning toward me with expectation instead of dismissal. I used to imagine moments like this, moments where I'd finally feel worthy of being seen. But standing there, with the weight of the world listening, I didn't think about the fame or the recognition. I thought about the nights I worked in silence, the mornings I doubted myself, the days I felt invisible, and the people who unintentionally pushed me toward becoming the version of myself I had always dreamed of. Sometimes the world gives you the exact storm you need to grow roots strong enough to survive whatever comes next. During the lunch break, a young man approached me with shaky hands and eyes full of hope. He told me he had watched my rise from afar and that my journey made him believe he didn't have to give up on his dreams. He said his family treated him the same way mine once treated me, like ambition was foolish, like dreams were impractical, like he wasn't enough. Hearing him speak felt like listening to an old version of myself. I put my hand on his shoulder and told him something I wish someone had told me back when I needed it most. You don't owe your dreams an explanation, you owe them a chance. His expression changed as if someone had finally handed him permission to believe in himself again. After the summit, my story spread even further, not because of the award, but because people finally understood the truth behind it. Success isn't about being chosen. It's about choosing yourself long before anyone else does. I started receiving messages from strangers around the world, each one sharing their battles, their doubts, their quiet victories. They told me my journey made them feel less alone. That was the moment I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been doubted, dismissed, underestimated, or told their dreams weren't realistic. It belonged to every person who sat at a table where they were treated like the least, even though life had something far greater planned for them. Weeks later, Time invited me to speak at their annual gala. As I walked onto the grand stage with thousands of people watching, I felt the weight of my past, my failures, my doubts, and my scars turn into something beautiful, a foundation, not a burden. When I spoke, I didn't talk about fame or achievement. I talked about belief, resilience, and the power of being counted out. I told the audience the truth. Sometimes the people who doubt you are the ones who fear you will become everything they never dared to be. The room went silent, not out of shock, but because they understood. Deep down, everyone has faced a moment where they had to choose between listening to the world's judgment or listening to their own heart. After the gala, as I rode back to my hotel in a quiet car with city lights flickering past the windows, I realized something that took me years to learn. The biggest transformation in my life wasn't the recognition, it was the shift in how I saw myself. I no longer stood in the shadow of their expectations. I no longer tied my worth to their words. I no longer waited for approval I never needed. I had become someone who could sit alone with confidence, walk into a room with purpose, and face the world with an unshakable belief in who I was becoming. On the last night before I flew home, I stood on the balcony overlooking the glowing skyline. Cold wind brushed my face, and I closed my eyes, letting the city's heartbeat echo in my chest. I replayed everything, the laughter at Thanksgiving, the doubt in their voices, the silence of my own ambition, the moment the world finally saw me. And then I whispered something to myself, something simple but powerful. You made it, not because they believed, but because you did. And that, more than the title, the applause, or the magazine cover, was the greatest victory of all, proving to myself that the person they once called unemployed had become someone unstoppable, someone unbreakable, someone who learned to turn every doubt into fuel and every setback into strength.